This story is a work of fiction, inspired by real events. Names, dates, locations, and identifying details have been changed or dramatized to protect privacy and enhance the narrative. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental or used fictitiously. This content is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only. It does not aim to glorify crime, promote violence, or pass judgment on real individuals. Viewer discretion is advised. Some scenes may contain mature, disturbing, or triggering content. What you are about to watch could have happened anywhere, to anyone. It's inspired by real events. Whispers of truth buried beneath layers of fiction. We've changed the names, the dates, the locations, but the emotions, the betrayal, the fear, those are real. This story is not meant to accuse, only to reveal, to make you question, who do you really trust? If stories like this keep you thinking, long after they end, hit subscribe, smash like, and drop your theory in the comments. Now watch closely, before the truth disappears again.
Amara Fields was more than a name on a social media profile. At 29, she was the smiling face behind videos that blended style, faith, and quiet strength. Thousands followed her for the way she made life feel both beautiful and possible. She was married to Pastor Elias Fields, a man whose sermons filled church pews and whose charm drew admiration wherever he went. Together, they looked untouchable, but appearances rarely tell the whole story. In recent months, her friends noticed changes, canceled plans, a softer tone in her captions, a deleted post that read, "Not everyone who claims to protect you wants what's best for you." When asked about it, she laughed and moved on. 1 week before her death, she left a voice memo for a close friend. Her voice shook as she said, "If anything happens to me, it's not an accident." The night it happened, rain fell in slow, steady sheets over their quiet suburban street. Inside the Fields' home, the air was heavy with unspoken tension. At some point after dark, a crash echoed through the kitchen. A neighbor, hearing a muffled cry, paused at their window. Then silence. By morning, Amara was gone. What no one outside the investigation knew was that in the hours before her death, Elias had made a discovery, a folder of medical records from a private clinic. Records that revealed a truth she had kept to herself for years. Multiple past abortions and a hysterectomy. She could never bear children. What happened next turned a respected preacher into a killer and a marriage into a crime scene. The question that remains is simple, but it cuts to the bone. Was this about betrayal or control? Before the tragedy, Amara's life looked like something out of a quiet suburban dream. Their Oak Glen home sat on a tree-lined street with a white fence, a neat garden, and sunlight spilling through the kitchen each morning. Amara had worked her way up from modest beginnings in the city. She built her online platform from scratch, thrifted clothes, borrowed cameras, and late-night editing sessions. Over the years, she became a voice of inspiration, blending personal style with words of resilience. Elias Fields was the rising star of their local church. His charisma wasn't limited to the pulpit. People described him as a man who could make anyone feel understood. Together, they became a power couple, faith and influence hand in hand. Their social media showed charity galas, church events, and carefully curated date nights. To outsiders, they looked unshakable, but those closest to Amara noticed the first subtle shifts. Elias began making quiet suggestions about her content, which photos to post, which captions to change, which outfits didn't reflect their values. She complied, at first seeing it as care. Over time, her world grew smaller. She declined more invitations. A trip with her sister was postponed without explanation. Friends described her as present but distant, her smile just a little more tired. Her home reflected that same blend of warmth and quiet restraint. A Bible sat beside stacks of influencer contracts on the coffee table. Wedding photos lined the walls, each smile perfectly in place. But in her dresser drawer was a small notebook. Pages of affirmations mixed with fragments of frustration. At the time, no one thought these were warning signs. Life was busy. The ministry was growing. From the outside, it looked like stability. But illusions don't last forever. And beneath the surface of this carefully built life, something dangerous was already taking shape. This keeps the emotional anchor and the foreshadowing seeds, but removes the extra repetition and slower descriptions from the long version, so we stay lean and forward-moving. The first sign of real trouble slipped in quietly. One Sunday evening, long after the congregation had left, a custodian at the church overheard muffled voices from Pastor Elias's office. Low at first, then sharp. By the time they emerged, their faces were calm again, as if nothing had happened. Days later, Amara posted a cryptic message to her social media. Not everyone who claims to protect you wants what's best for you. It vanished less than an hour later, but friends who saw it wondered what had prompted it. Her public schedule began to thin. She skipped a brand meeting she had been preparing for. She quietly stopped attending the midweek women's Bible study she once led. Friends noticed faint bruises on her wrist at lunch one day. When asked, she brushed it off as a kitchen accident. Elias's demeanor was shifting too. His sermons leaned heavier on obedience, betrayal, and what he called divine order in marriage. In private, he seemed quicker to frustration, ending conversations abruptly. People close to them began to speculate. Some thought it was simply the strain of ministry. Others felt something deeper was wrong, though no one could say exactly what. Two possibilities emerged in whispers. Either Amara was pulling back for her own reasons, or she was living under a weight she couldn't speak about. The cracks were still small then, easy to overlook. But like fractures in glass, they were spreading, and soon they would reach the breaking point. Tuesday began quietly. The sky hung heavy with clouds, and the air carried the damp scent of oncoming rain. Elias left early for what he told the church staff was a meeting. Amara spent the morning filming a short video for a brand campaign, her voice warm, her smile careful. Around midday, Elias returned unexpectedly. In his hand was a thin folder, medical records from a private clinic. Inside were details Amara had never shared with him, multiple past abortions and a hysterectomy. She could never bear children. At 3:40 p.m., a neighbor saw Amara carrying grocery bags inside. Moments later, the conversation began in the kitchen. Low voices at first, then sharper. The hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock filled the pauses between words. Elias accused her of lying, of shaming him as a husband and preacher. Amara tried to explain, her tone calm but urgent. Then came the words that ended any chance of peace. "You made a fool of me." The argument exploded. A glass fell, shattering on the tile. The smell of citrus from the groceries mixed with the sharp tang of fear. She stepped back. He stepped forward. The struggle was fast, chaotic, and violent. When it ended, Amara lay motionless on the kitchen floor. Outside, the rain began to pour harder, drumming against the windows. Elias stood over her, his breathing uneven, the reality of what he'd done settling in with the weight of the storm. He didn't call for help. He didn't run. He sat in a chair, staring at her still body, as the rain drowned out the silence inside the house. By the time he left later that night, the lights were still on, the front door left ajar, and the street remained unaware of what had just happened behind those walls. The next morning, a neighbor noticed the Fields' front door ajar. Grocery bags still sat just inside the hallway, untouched. Calling Amara's name brought no answer. Stepping into the kitchen, the scene unfolded like a silent confession. A shattered glass on the floor, an overturned chair, and Amara lying motionless. For a moment, the neighbor stood frozen, unable to reconcile the stillness before her with the vibrant woman she knew. Then came the scream that cut through the quiet street. Within minutes, police and paramedics arrived, their radios crackling, boots moving quickly across the hardwood floors. The signs were immediate. No forced entry, no theft, nothing to suggest a stranger. The violence had come from inside her own home. By midday, news vans lined the street. Camera crews aimed their lenses at the front door. Members of Elias's congregation stood in small clusters, some crying openly, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Social media filled with frantic comments under Amara's last post. "Please tell me this isn't real. Someone say she's okay." The hashtag number sign Justice for Amara began to trend before nightfall. That evening, friends and family gathered for a candlelight vigil outside her home. Soft prayers and sobs carried in the humid air. Her sister stood silently, holding a framed photograph of Amara, her expression locked between grief and disbelief. Behind the public mourning, detectives were already narrowing their focus. With no sign of forced entry, suspicion turned inward. Neighbors confirmed hearing a crash the night before. Friends mentioned Amara's sudden withdrawal from social life, and in hushed tones a few recalled her cryptic messages. Elias, still outwardly composed, gave statements to police and appeared at the vigil. But quietly, investigators were piecing together a timeline, one that placed him near the home at the exact time neighbors heard the disturbance. Within days, he was no longer just a grieving husband in the eyes of the law. He was a person of interest, and the evidence they were about to uncover would push the case past suspicion into undeniable truth. From the start, investigators sensed Elias's grief was measured. He spoke softly, offered timelines with precision, and repeated that he had been at the church late into the night. But timelines have a way of bending under pressure. Surveillance footage from a gas station less than 2 miles from the Fields' home showed Elias at 9:42 p.m., just minutes after neighbors reported hearing a crash and a muffled cry. He was alone, gripping the steering wheel, eyes fixed straight ahead. Inside the house, the scene told its own story. Blood pattern analysis revealed a struggle in close quarters. The broken glass, the angle of the chair, the marks on the countertop, each detail suggested the fight began in the kitchen. Then came the folder. On the dining table, police found the thin stack of medical documents. They were years old from a private clinic, detailing multiple pregnancy terminations and a hysterectomy. One doctor's note, in clear handwriting, confirmed Amara could no longer conceive. Detectives learned Elias had visited the clinic earlier that day, requesting the records for what he claimed were insurance purposes. Staff remembered his intensity when they handed them over. Friends of Amara shared the messages she sent in the days before her death. One read, "I think he knows. Please pray for me." Another, sent the night before, "If anything happens to me, it's not an accident." With evidence mounting, Elias was brought in for questioning. At first, he clung to his alibi, but as detectives pressed him about the medical records, his voice shifted from denial to justification. He spoke of feeling betrayed, of being humiliated as both a husband and a preacher. The prosecution's case was clear. Elias discovered a truth about his wife's past and chose violence over conversation. They argued this was a crime of pride and control, not passion, the calculated act of a man whose image meant more than his marriage. In court, the folder was introduced as Exhibit A. Jurors heard Amara's voice in the recovered messages. They saw the forensic diagrams of the kitchen, the timeline of his movements, and the gas station footage. The defense argued it was a tragic accident during an emotional confrontation, pointing to the lack of prior police reports. But Amara's sister's testimony struck the deepest chord. She spoke of private conversations where Amara described his controlling behavior, his growing temper, and her fear that one day he might truly hurt her. It took the jury less than a day. The verdict, guilty of second-degree murder. Sentence, 28 years, with no possibility of parole for the first 20. Elias stood motionless as the words were read. Behind him, some church members wept quietly. Others stared straight ahead, unable to reconcile the man they knew with the man the evidence revealed. For Amara's family, justice was a word without comfort. But in the weeks after the trial, they began speaking publicly, not just about the murder, but about the warning signs that went unnoticed until it was too late. Amara Fields' life was more than the way it ended. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, a woman whose voice and presence could inspire thousands. Her story should have been about hope, growth, and the community she built. But her death forces us to look closer at the quiet beginnings of tragedy. It started small, control disguised as care, criticism hidden in concern, the slow dimming of her independence. These moments are often overlooked until it's too late. Her murder was not about one truth she kept. It was about how that truth collided with pride, image, and control. Elias Fields chose to protect how the world saw him rather than protect the woman he vowed to love. And in that choice, everything shattered. The lesson is clear. When someone's world begins to shrink, when their voice grows quieter, when you see fear where there was once confidence, Pay attention, speak up, step in. Sometimes the smallest questions can change the outcome of the biggest moments. Amara should still be here. She should have been free to live her truth without fear that it would cost her life. If her story reaches even one person in time, some part of her will live on in the lives it saves. If you've been moved by her story and want more true crime documentaries told with honesty and depth, make sure you subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it so others can hear it too. Your support helps keep these stories alive and ensures that the lessons they carry are never forgotten.